Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no coal. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is The Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. We're broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, we talk to a union leader from AFGE that works in the Social Security Administration about underfunding and short staffing. We bring on Harvey J. Kaye and Alan Minsky to talk about how workers deserve not only civil rights, but economic rights. We have a very sad story for you about Warrior Met scabs and executives later on in the show. In overtime, so you're going to want to make sure that you stay tuned for that, we're talking to a railroad worker about the fallout of the rail dispute. All that and more on today's Valley Labor Report. If you want to be part of the program, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail or send us a text message all throughout the week. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, and now Adam tells me we are live on Twitch. We're live on Twitch, folks. So
that's right.
What happens over there? I think we get hype trains. Let's get a hype train going over
I
on
have
Twitch.
no idea, but yeah, whatever good things can happen there, let's hope they happen.
Yeah. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program, make a one-time donation, buy our stickers or anything like that, you can go to our website. That's tvlr.fm. You can donate at tvlr.fm/donate. You can check out what is in our store at tvlr.fm/store, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then hey, think about getting your local to sponsor this show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. And so let's just go ahead and jump into our first segment of the week. That is Last Week in Southern Labor. Last Week in Southern Labor is a segment that we do every week, mostly, where we tell you what happened in the labor movement in the South. We pull the information from Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird?, which compiles all this information for the entire United States. So if you want to see what's going on outside the South, then subscribe to that newsletter at whogetsthebird.substack.com. And with that, let's jump into new organizing for the week and a half preceding December the 4th. In new organizing, we've got 75 workers who make chemicals for Nurion in LaPorte, Texas, are organizing with the Steelworkers Union. 65 more baristas at 3 locations, all in the South this week. That's in Houston and Kingwood, Texas, and Ashburn, Virginia, are joining the Starbucks Workers United wave. 28 workers who work on F-16s for Kaye and Associates in New Orleans are unionizing with IUE-CWA. And in NLRB union wins, we had 98 first student school bus workers in Amarillo, Texas, voting 61-9 to join the Teamsters Local 577. This is the same local that organized 17 drivers for Halcon Corporation in Amarillo and Dalhart, Texas, and Liberal, Kansas.
Nice.
Very nice. Got a lot of strikes and bargaining updates today. In Edward Waters University in Jacksonville, Florida, they are moving to unrecognize their faculty's AAUP union, saying that they can do this because of religious freedom. Among many jaw-dropping details, an ILA longshoreman union leader who serves on the school's board says he supports workers having union rights only if their employers agree.
Oh, my.
Yeah. That calls for a censure from the ILA at the very least.
I'd be pushing for a recall if that was my officer.
Yeah. Fort Worth, Texas journalists at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram started an unfair labor practice strike this week. At King Daughters Medical Center in Ashland, Kentucky, management says they are nullifying the existing SEIU 1199 contract covering 500 workers as part of the University of Kentucky takeover of the hospital. 800 dock workers at the Port of Mobile, Alabama remain on strike with ILA Local 1410. 1,100 paper mill workers with Steelworkers Local 507 in Canton, North Carolina, have voted down their second contract offer in a row at Evergreen Packaging, raising the possibility of a strike. Speaking of paper mills, nearly 500 USW members remain locked out at West Rock in Cottonton, Alabama. The NLRB union is raising the alarm not just about their existential funding issues, but also management efforts to end telework, as if furloughs and constant underfunding were not enough to make staff want to quit. The telework fight at the EEOC, however, which led to FLRA charges, has been resolved per the AFGE Council 216. After authorizing a strike, Delta Airline Pilots Association pilots have a contract offer from the company that includes 34% raises. Members will have to vote on the deal, but the airlines seem to think it could move things at other tables where things have stalled, including at American, where the bargaining committee rejected a deal, at United, where members rejected a deal, and Southwest, where TWU Local 550 dispatchers just held a rally and SWAPA pilots protested on Wall Street. At United Airlines, 5 unions have formed a bargaining coalition, which is always promising, but in practice can mean many different things. Speaking of bargaining coalitions, workers at Disney in Kissimmee, Florida, rallied as their expired contract hit the 2-month mark. The coalition of 6 unions involved represents around 42,000 workers. A transit strike didn't happen this week, with ATU Local 1447 in Louisville, Kentucky, reaching an agreement with management after having authorized a strike. ATU Local 1493 in Roanoke, Virginia, held informational pickets for a new contract from First Transit, which operates the area's Valley Metro. Teachers in St. Johns County, Florida, have rejected a contract offer with a piddling $1,200 raise. Plant City, Florida firefighters with IAFF are at an impasse, seeking a 36% increase over 3 years. In politics and legislation, we all know that Joe Biden, with the help of the Democratic and Republican parties, imposed a contract on some 60,000 rail workers, those 4 unions which had rejected agreements, denying them paid sick days or any other meaningful improvement to a critical industry that is nearing operational collapse due to financialized profiteering and mass worker exodus, which is by design. It's important to understand that, 1, Biden could have acted otherwise, and 2, the unions could have acted otherwise. They chose an inside strategy that relied entirely on Joe Biden doing the right thing, and they refused to do anything, mobilize members, strike. 2 unions actually unilaterally moved strike deadlines without new tentative agreements, and several others moved them months down the line, losing all political leverage before the midterms. The unions also refused to work with progressives or others who might have made important allies when Biden twisted the knife. The political punchline here is that Joe Biden sided with capital when the chips were down, no matter how many union halls he uses for photo ops.
Amen.
The union punchline is that if labor relies exclusively on the Democratic Party inside track and won't use its people power or think creatively or politically, we are doomed.
Amen.
The Texas Supreme Court heard arguments in a case in which Houston firefighters, and presumably those across the state, collective bargaining rights are at stake. In internal union politics, there is an absolute earthquake underway at the UAW as reformers sweep into office in that union's first ever direct elections for top officers. UAW Members United, which is the slate backed by Reform Caucus Unite All Workers for Democracy, challenged for 7 of the 14 spots on the International Executive Board and won 5 of them outright. The other 2, which is the Region 9 director covering Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Western New York, and the international president, which obviously covers the whole union, will go to runoffs beginning in January. Looking at the anti-incumbent margins, however, hovering around 60%, it's hard to imagine Ray Curry hangs on to his seat, which means that new leadership will be bargaining a Big 3 contract that expires in mid-September, which means negotiations are likely to be a lot more aggressive. So looking forward to seeing what that brings out.
UAW is such an important union. It's really it's exciting to see this kind of reform effort taking hold, and it's much needed, much overdue. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. So have we got Angela in the Zoom yet?
She is actually coming into the Zoom right now as we speak.
Fantastic. Angela is coming into the Zoom right now, and she is our first guest. Our first guest this morning is Angela DiGeronimo. She is a claims specialist for the Social Security Administration at a field office in New Jersey, if I remember correctly. She is also regional vice president for the AFGE Council 220, which is the Council of Social Security field offices. And she's also president for her local union. Angela, thanks for joining us on the Valley Labor Report this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. And what local number are you out of?
Local 2369.
2369. Well, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning. And let's just start off with some basic background information for folks at the top here. What services and programs does the Social Security Administration administer?
Well, the Social Security Administration provides services for the most vulnerable among our population. So that is the elderly and the disabled. We administer retirement, survivors, Medicare, and disability benefits. We administer 2 programs that a lot of people don't really understand and differentiate. There is Social Security programs where the worker has paid into it throughout their work lives through FICA taxes, and there's also SSI. We administer that as well. SSI is a needs-based program for people whose Social Security benefits may be too low or who are not insured for Social Security. So that is for people who are disabled and for aged people age 65 or older.
And what are some of the practical things that being able to receive these payments provide these Americans, the elderly and the disabled and the like?
Okay, so our programs basically are the number one reason why elderly and disabled individuals are kept out of poverty, right? So they have this monthly benefit that they could count on, that they use for housing, for food, for clothing, etc. So like I said, with Social Security, workers have paid into the program and now they are getting a pension from it. The SSI, again, needs-based. So when you're at your most vulnerable, when you get to the point where you're retiring, you worked your entire life, you now have a pension. A lot of workers don't have the luxury of earning at a level where they pay into a private pension fund. Some do, and that's in addition to their Social Security potentially, but most do not. So it basically keeps people out of poverty. It is an excellent program, and in the history of our country, probably the most effective.
I definitely agree. I think it was, if you look at actually how many people were in poverty before Social Security came about, how many elderly people were in poverty, I mean, the difference between elder poverty today and before Social Security is really staggering. That's some homework for people. I would encourage you to look that up. How many folks would you say are receiving some form of Social Security payment now?
Right now in 2021, there are 69.8 million individuals receiving benefits.
And how many folks were on Social Security in some form of Social Security payment in 2010?
That was 59.2 million.
And so, if I'm remembering right, there was an AFGE article about this, and that's basically like 20% more. There are 20% more people receiving Social Security payments between since 2010. From 2010 to now, we've got 20% more people than were on it previously. And so, presumably, Angela, and I'm sure that this is the case. The Social Security Administration has received commensurate funding increases to ensure that Americans who rely on these payments are able to get them in a timely fashion, and that the workers at this administration are able to do that and provide for the American people in a timely fashion, right?
Congress does provide through budget for the administering of these programs. We have not been funded adequately, I would say probably in the last decade.
And have there been actual funding cuts, or have we just been seeing stagnant funding since 2010?
Well, it's been stagnant, and at times, based on inflation, but it actually has been cuts. So we're seeing a declining of funding for administrating the program, while we're seeing an increase in beneficiaries that are receiving benefits and are applying for benefits. So the ratio is, we're currently at a staffing deficit of approximately 13%, while we have seen an increase of 21% in beneficiaries.
And this is saying here from AFGE's website that the budget for processing Social Security claims has actually gone down by 14% since 2010. And I'm assuming that that's like accounting for inflation and stuff. While at the same time, like you said, 20% more beneficiaries, but the budget for administering all this has gone down by 14%. And so, what does that mean both for the workers and for the people receiving these benefits?
Well, to put it in kind of simpler terms, right? We have approximately 10 million more people that we are serving their benefits, with 4,000 fewer employees. I used to say at a certain point that we were being asked, each employee was being asked to do the work of two. I would not be exaggerating if I were to say right now that each employee is being asked to do the work of 10. We're seeing things like employees are being assigned double appointments, sometimes triple appointments at the same exact time. I don't know how that is possible to interview 2 or 3 people all at one time. It's impossible, right? While at the same time it's not just that interview with the individual, that contact with the individual, the member of the public. There's also back end work that needs to be done. We need to adjudicate the claims. We need to process them, to put it in a more simple term. With disability, we also need to send these disability. We're not medical professionals. We don't make medical determinations, the employees at the Social Security Administration. We send them off to a state agency that makes the disability determination, the medical determination. So we need to fund that as well, and we haven't been funding those. We also have post-entitlement actions that need to be taken. All of these things used to be broken up amongst many employees for even just one claim. but now we're being asked to do the full range while also answering incoming calls and taking care of incoming people without appointments in the office. So it makes it very difficult. Without funding, there are different ways to starve a program, right? You can cut the benefits itself, or you can starve the funding to administer those programs. So that's basically where Congress needs to really pay attention and realize that they need to bring us to the levels of funding that we need.
Right, right, and all of this, all this extra work that's being piled on to workers at the Social Security Administration. This means that the recipients are having to wait longer before their benefits can be administered. And I think if I remember reading an article that most people, when they first apply for disability insurance, they're denied. So that process used to take something like 3 months, and now it's taking 7 months just to get through that first denial, and then they have to apply again because for some reason that's just seems to be the way that the system works. And all of this time, you're looking at 6 months to a year where people are not able to, that they're not having any support.
That is correct. And, again, the initial stage, you take the claim, as far as a claim specialist like myself, you take the claim, you send it to the state agency for a determination. They're underfunded, so they don't have adequate staffing. So that it holds up the process there. Then it comes back to us at the office, depending on what that determination is. We do what we need to do. If it's denied, the person gets the notice of denial. They're able to ask for a reconsideration. They might be denied at that second level. And again, all of this takes time because of the short staffing situation. And then if they are denied at that level, they're going to need to ask for a hearing if they want to continue to pursue it. They're going to ask for a hearing. Now this is a hearing with our administrative law judges who are also understaffed, and they will be put in queue for a hearing, which will take some time as well. So the American public, because of the understaffing and the starving of our administrative budget, is suffering. They are seeing long delays that they should not be seeing.
And how is this affecting morale at the Social Security Administration?
We have very dedicated employees at the Social Security Administration. I always say there's a common thread amongst people who decide that they want to work for the Social Security Administration. It comes from a perspective of wanting to provide service, right? Service to the American public. We're not just making widgets, we're making a difference in people's lives. So when you have that type of employee who is dedicated and truly wants to do a good job and truly wants to provide quality service, and you're constantly seeing that you can never see the end of the pile on your virtual desk because it's lists on computers, but for the sake of illustration, you never see the bottom of the pile. You never see the clear desk where everything that you set out to do for the day, even for just the day, is done, because you're constantly pulled in different directions, things that need your immediate attention. You have the person in front of you, obviously, they deserve your attention. So your morale is very low. And then you have, a situation where management is serving lists, not people, right? So the Social Security Administration, the leadership really needs to shift gears and refocus on being employee oriented, making the employee the center of public service, and create an environment where every employee can blossom and thrive. And that will then in turn translate to excellent customer service and public service. Uh, Once staffing is up and you're able to do your job, instead of being tone deaf to the fact that the reason that the work is not getting done is not because the employee is not putting in 150%, literally 150% each day, but actually because there is a short staffing crisis. We're not able to retain our people because at a certain point morale gets to be too much, where you're feeling you're not effective, you're not appreciated, and you're never going to be able to do this job well. That all
Right.
leads to recruitment also. We're for the first time seeing where if we have job openings, candidates are actually turning it down when they're offered the job. That had never happened before. Social Security used to be at the top of the federal agencies for agencies where people wanted to work. It's now close to the bottom. I think we're second to last.
And so what is AFGE Council 220 asking for from Congress?
We are asking for adequate funding where actually it was we're actually requesting, I'll give you the actual numbers because I have it in front of me. It's 1.726 billion increase above what President Biden's budget request of 14.73 billion was for excuse me, FY23. That would in turn allow for hiring at an adequate rate. It would also allow for updating technology. It would not just staff the Social Security employees, but also the state agencies where we can get the disability claims moving as well.
Gotcha. Well, Angela, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning. Is there anything else that you reckon folks ought to know about this issue?
We have our position papers on our website, which is afgec220.org, and that's available to anyone if they want to take a look at it. I encourage people to take a look at it. It's very thoughtful and very thorough. And I thank you for taking up our cause and for giving us a voice this morning.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Angela DiGeronimo, President of AFGE Local 2396, Regional Vice President for AFGE Council 220. Thanks for talking to us.
Take care. Thank you.
All right. Folks, we're going to be going to a break. On the other side, we are talking to Harvey J. Kaye about a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, along with Alan Minsky. If you want to give us a call, you got any thoughts about the program so far, you can give us a call or shoot us a text message at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. See you on the other side.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. We've got a phone number and the lines are open. The phone number is 844-899-8857. You can call or text during the show and we can bring your call on the air or read your text message. But right now, we're going to go to our next guests. If we've got him in the Zoom. Presumably we have him in the Zoom, right, Adam?
Yes, we do.
So our next guest today, we've got Harvey J. Kaye and Alan Minsky. Harvey J. Kaye is Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Alan Minsky is the Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America, but most importantly, they're our next guests. Alan, Harvey, thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great to be here.
Great to have y'all. So, y'all are here to talk about something that y'all been pushing for a little while, which is a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. And but first, let's start with some history. Harvey, you like history. What is the precedent for stuff like this, for an economic Bill of Rights? That sounds, maybe people haven't heard that word before, or they don't know what that means. What is are there other examples of something like this in history?
Well, it's great to be speaking to the Tennessee Valley about Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, it was Franklin Roosevelt's argument late in the course of World War II in 1944 that Americans had come to the point in the wake of the New Deal and the war effort and the way in which they had rallied, against not only the Great Depression, but also those who had brought on the Great Depression in the 30s. And in the course of the war itself, that they had continued to advance labor unionism and that they had continued to raise their own expectations about a post-war social democratic America. So in his State of the Union message in 1944, Franklin Roosevelt, after reviewing the state of the war effort itself, actually said basically that Americans had come to the realization In fact, I'll read his own words. We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men, that is, needy men, are not free men. And then he said, and this is one of the most, if you like, visionary, perhaps even radical statements made by an American president. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station, race, or creed. And he then proceeded to lay out a series of arguments, a series of calls for the creation of rights that would guarantee such things as healthcare, education, housing, and so on. But this is the key thing. This was just not something that he perceived. In 1943, the White House had commissioned polls to be done asking Americans, what do they want to pursue after the war? And I can tell you that between 75 and to 95% of the American people asked, that included Democrats and Republicans, basically wanted to extend and deepen what we would call today social democracy. The best example I can give you is on the question of healthcare, 83% of Americans said they wanted universal, guaranteed healthcare. Now, he didn't necessarily believe they would enact that right away. He predicted in his speech that there would be opposition, not only from the sort of usual suspects on the right, but most especially he warned about opposition that would come from what we today would call the billionaires, and in his day were basically the millionaires who would oppose it. And he actually said this is going to be right-wing opposition that we're going to have to fight. Now, he didn't get the Economic Bill of Rights enacted, though he did get the GI Bill of Rights enacted, which was the largest social welfare program ever produced, ever enacted in American history. And yet the idea for an Economic Bill of Rights did not go away, okay? It was there sort of in the imagination of a vast number of Americans, and especially in the ranks of labor. And in the 1960s, so we're talking good 20 years later, A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, one of the most significant labor and civil rights leaders of the 20th century, he put together what came to be called the Freedom Budget, in which he called on Americans, on Congress, to enact a budget that would, in 10 years, completely eliminate poverty and would realize the argument that FDR had made at the beginning of the war, that is World War II, for the four freedoms, especially the idea of freedom from want and fear. And I'll just tell you, 150 leading figures, foundation heads, labor union leaders, political figures, endorsed this call. Unfortunately, the war in Vietnam was given pride of place, you might say, though hardly pride in our minds today. Nevertheless, not long after this call, which Randolph issued in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 called for the creation of an Economic Bill of Rights for all Americans. Once again, it didn't happen, though much that did take place in the Great Society years of Lyndon Johnson was actually an effort to extend the New Deal in ways that had not happened during the 1940s. But then, of course, in our own time, we saw in the election year of 2000, and then, listen to me, 2016 and then 2020, Bernie Sanders reminded Americans of that original FDR call for an Economic Bill of Rights, and he pushed the idea. So what's happened is Alan, as executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, and I, having produced with the Gravel Institute a video on FDR's speech and its significance for us today, we put together, in cooperation with a number of other people, including Nina Turner from Cleveland, Ohio, this call for an Economic Bill of Rights, a 21st century Economic Bill of Rights. And that's what we've been trying to sort of get the word out in these last 9 months. I just want to say before we get into what that is that, and this is crucial, in 1944, when FDR issued that call, the first and foremost groups to rally behind that call were both the AFL and the CIO, which I'm sure most people know in those days were two separate federations. One were the trades unions and the other the industrial unions. And both organized and campaigned for both FDR and the Economic Bill of Rights. And in the case of the CIO, they actually launched the CIO Political Action Committee to support the reelection of FDR, but also very hard, they pushed for the Economic Bill of Rights. And I'll just give you, since this is, I can play a visual game here, a show and tell. This book, the first round, should anyone be interested, is the story of the CIO Political Action Committee. Those pages are not necessary, they were not written as a book. Those are the pamphlets, the numerous pamphlets that the CIO issued to promote the fight, as they saw it, for the Economic Bill of Rights. And it's time that labor today, in the absence of an administration that will advance it, that labor itself today take the lead alongside groups like Progressive Democrats of America, Our Revolution, and others to make an Economic Bill of Rights part of our political imagination.
Yeah, and that's what you were talking about, the necessitous men are not free men. I think that is really the crux of why it's so important to have something like this, and why, things like we just finished talking to a union leader for the Social Security Administration in AFGE about the importance of actually, not only funding Social Security and those benefits, but also funding the administration of them, and how beneficial Social Security and Medicare have been to working people, to Americans with disabilities, and how much less free they would be without that, and how much more free more people would be if we had something like what FDR was pushing before.
I'll just say, in terms of Social Security, two major laws were enacted in 1935 with the initiative of the Democratic Congress and the president who led them, and that is the Social Security Act that you're referring to, number one, and number two, the National Labor Relations Act. They changed the political landscape in America. It placed, if you like, social democracy directly onto the American political landscape. And in the case of the National Labor Relations Act, it placed the federal government behind workers' efforts to organize. Now, this is interesting because if you had on a guest who was talking about the underfunding of the Social Security apparatus, it's also the case that the National Labor Relations Act is really stymied in its efforts to support the unionization efforts of Amazon workers and Starbucks workers and all the other folks who are fighting for their rights in the workplace. Why? Because we have underfunded, meaning the American government has underfunded the National Labor Relations. They are understaffed and seriously incapacitated from pursuing their mission.
Right. And so what were some of the forces that were arrayed against, and you spoke about this a bit, against FDR and working people and the unions who were fighting for an economic Bill of Rights before?
The fiercest opposition came from the big corporations, okay? The big automakers, the steelmakers. They actually launched campaigns after the war to try to block the ambitions and aspirations of the American people to secure the Economic Bill of Rights. After FDR passed away, Truman, who was not at all the kind of politician that FDR was, did initially seek to make the Economic Bill of Rights part of his own administration's agenda. And though he made many a mistake, it is the case that, it did not die as an idea. But they actually launched campaigns. Now, let's not forget that after the war, both the AFL and CIO, and once again, especially the CIO, launched massive organizing campaigns in the South in order to try to break the back of these right to work states. But of course, the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947 placed the right to work in basically into law. Okay, so and it made it all the more difficult. And I'll just say, this is as a sidebar, but a very important sidebar to this, that when labor was organizing in the South, the problem that they confronted was not only the opposition of business, they also confronted the opposition of white supremacy. Because if you're going to organize labor in the South, you had to organize Black and white workers, but Jim Crow laws made it very difficult, and racist attitudes made it all the more difficult. So, and to his favor, Truman did actually launch the first National Civil Rights Commission to propose the kinds of things that needed to happen. In any case, the opposition was strong, absolutely strong, against national health care. Companies did not want national health care. And by the way, workers did not have health care by way of where they worked at that time. It was a very rare thing to have health care. And it did not become, so to speak, a more common practice for big corporations to negotiate that kind of question until 1950 with the Treaty of Detroit, where the UAW finally and CIO finally gave way to the idea of what we would call private welfare programs, health care by way of your employer. The CIO and the AFL both, for quite a few years after the war, refused to negotiate for health care because they believed in national health care. And by the way, strangely enough, it was the AFL that really continued the fight for national health care even more aggressively during the 50s and beyond than did the CIO, because the CIO had the big industrial contracts. But anyhow, it's this Economic Bill of Rights would once again, I think, progressively, if not indeed radically, transform the political landscape. It would change the lives of the vast majority of Americans and also create a more prosperous America. The greatest problem that Roosevelt confronted when he took office in 1933 was the fact that the economy couldn't get going because workers didn't have any purchasing power. They were not only the unemployed, but those who were working were paid so little, had so little that they could not, if you like, prime the pump. And it had to be the government. And that was FDR's position. And if we think about, we now live in a new Gilded Age, these last 45 years, the gross inequalities, the vast concentrations of wealth that has also corrupted American political life and literally handed power over to a class of billionaire plutocrats. This Economic Bill of Rights would change the political environment, okay?
I had a question. I wanted to bring Alan into the conversation and just ask, what has been the response from folks about your call to the second or a new Economic Bill of Rights, both from political circles, other progressive Democrats, but also from, I'm curious if you've had any reactions from labor leaders and the unions themselves.
Basically, when we introduced this to progressives and to people in the union movement, and we have an opportunity to present it in a but first of all, briefly, and then in a more extensive way, it has been met with universal enthusiasm and embrace. However, I do fear that the contemporary American progressive movement, we're not in the same phase we were in before the Bernie Sanders campaign of 2015, 2016. For people who do not know, Progressive Democrats of America, PDA, was the national organization that drafted Bernie Sanders to run as a Democrat. We began that in 2013. We ran the Run Bernie Run campaign. It took a lot of arm twisting to get Bernie to run and to run as a Democrat. And we were the organization that pursued that. Everybody else on the progressive left at the time was trying to draft Elizabeth Warren. There's a bit of a backstory there I won't go into as to why we focused on Bernie. But Bernie, as you might remember, was even criticized, especially by people affiliated with the Clinton campaign, that he was all about economics. Okay, fast forward to when we introduced this to the world, Harvey and I, at the beginning of this past year. And one of the arguments that I made most vociferously to the general public was that that economics were the top issue in polling for the American people. I mean, if you look at the polls across the last year, that was the case. If you look at the polls over the last 50 years in America, it's lapping all other competition. And here was even the progressive left going into the 2022 primary season without an economic message. Now, unfortunately, there are other, and I'm not going to name them by names because they are our allies and we work with them. We sit on various tables with them as we try to decide, are we going to unify behind this or that candidate in this or that district? They become very invested in other projects, and particularly with one that PDA fully endorses, which is the Green New Deal. Unfortunately, the Green New Deal, and then they'll argue, well, we have the Green New Deal already. Well, the Green New Deal is great, but in the public imagination, it is not an economic program. In the public imagination, it is overwhelmingly perceived as being primarily about the environment, the environmental crisis, et cetera. In fact, it has a lot of problems in terms of workers thinking it will take their jobs away and not replace them with high-paying jobs. And so it's actually not a very strong, and you've seen it sort of fallen out of the discourse more out of the last 2 years. So we did try to get groups to endorse the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, and we didn't fully succeed. Well, Harvey and I are going to go to bat on that and insist the progressive Democrats wake up and understand what the American people want to hear progressives talk about. That one of the reasons I think that Bernie did so phenomenally well, far exceeding PDA's expectations, far exceeding his own expectations in 2015 and 2016, is because he led with economics. Look, the American dream crashed and burned in 2007, 2008, and it has not come back in anything resembling its classical mythological form, which of course revolves around independent home ownership. Okay. And neoliberalism as a social organizing economic strategy was able to maintain that myth through households taking on more and more debt. And of course, that's what collapsed, especially around household mortgages and debts in 2007 and 8. And there's no putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. We need a full-on reorganization of the wealth distribution in the United States of America. People know this, people connect with it. And when you just list off what's in our proposal for a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, it is common sense what people want. I don't know if you all know, but in the past just month, we've had out of the state of New Jersey a poll that shows 71% of the population of New Jersey basically supports single-payer universal health care, Medicare for all. A red county in Wisconsin ran a ballot measure called Dunn County. I mean, it's an overwhelmingly GOP county, and it, in its measure on the ballot, voted to support universal single-payer health care. Talk to people this way about the first entry on the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, the right to a useful job at a living wage. And you say to them, okay, whether it's the market or it's a public job, if a adult human being works 40 hours a week at a job, should they have to have another job? Or should they, by right, be earning a living wage when they do that job? And almost across the board, everybody will say it should be the latter, not the former. They should not be in the situation they are in now where they need 2, 3, 4 jobs just to make ends meet.
Right.
And so, this is really powerful stuff to the American people right now. And sadly, I think even Sanders wasn't quite as strong on economics in 2020 as he was in 2016. And it is the strong hand winning message of the progressive movement. And progressives needs to wake up and realize that, if they're going to grow the movement, and we need to. I mean, neoliberalism as a social organizing principle has been devastating. It has delivered the United States to the most severe political crisis that we've had in this country, maybe since the Civil War. I mean, with Trumpism, and you have a former president saying he wants to suspend the Constitution, for crying out loud. And of course, the wealth inequality is dramatic. And also, let's be honest, neoliberal capitalism is an organizing principle for this country and the world, has 100% failed to address an existential crisis for all of humanity. In fact, you either are willfully deluding yourself, or you have to accept that the idea that the market is going to answer our crisis around the global climate, or we have to change things. And we have to change things in a way that brings democratic control, not market control, over the solutions to that problem, and bring democratic control, not eviscerating markets, not eliminating markets. I don't think that there's an appetite for that among the American people to revert to something like command economy of proposals, or even highly escalated percentage of the economy being, except for making the healthcare system, of course, government run. Other than that big increase in government expenditures, I don't think there's a huge appetite to see the public sector of the economy, really just explode in size. So it's a question of, again, very much the approach that Roosevelt took. I mean, Roosevelt, if you want to get fully theoretical, and I think Marxists have to sort of accept this, Marx did not account for Keynes and FDR, right? And it was off the FDR platform that the most prosperous middle class in the history of the world was built. And here's the thing, though. We do have to approach these things with the realization that building a New Deal-like economy in the 21st century is different than building it. In other words, building it off of the platform of where we are in the present moment in 2020 is different than building it off the platform coming out of the 1920s. So we're going to have to introduce these measures, pursue them, and be very agile as we do that. But I think what's essential about what Harvey and I have done, given that last point I just made, is it provides a template of what the ends have to be. The means of how we get there probably builds off of the FDR New Deal template, but again, with adjustments, because 1920s Fordism is different than 2020 neoliberalism, but we can't get caught up in anything like Tony Blair's third wayism, because that is just bogus. That is, all of that just amounted to allocations to the welfare state when you had surpluses and then austerity otherwise. So everything was on a downward path and wealth inequality increased. No, we need these ends as outlined in the 21st century Economic Bill of Rights, and nothing other than achieving them is politically adequate.
And we've gone through a couple of them already. That's the right to a useful and well-paying job, and the right to health care, which would be Medicare for all. Those are a couple of the platforms on a couple of the positions in the Economic Bill of Rights that y'all are pushing. What are the others that y'all are looking for?
Harvey, Harvey can return because he is so much more eloquent than I am. And by the way, Harvey has the pleasure of getting to cite quotes from FDR and Thomas Paine, who obviously it's more of an eloquent form of the English language than all of us who've lived for 40 years consuming corporate television as the model for the English language. So we can return to Harvey's eloquence, but I'll read the 10 of them so everybody can know what they are. And I'll just read them straightforward with no commentary. Number 1 is a useful job that pays a living wage. Number 2, a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining. 3, comprehensive quality health care. And I think we probably will add a phrase, free at the point of service. 4, complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet. 5, decent, safe, affordable housing. Let me just pause to say all of these would be considered effectively human rights. Okay, so decent, safe, affordable housing, number 5, like a human right. 6, a clean environment and a healthy planet. 7, a meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement. Number 8, sound banking and financial services. Number 9, an equitable and economically fair justice system. And number 10, recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. And maybe to interpret that last one for people, vacation, paid vacation, exactly what the railroad workers did not get and, of course, deserve as a human right. So those are the 10. I did add some commentary. I apologize, but now back to you guys.
Yeah, well,
if
Harvey,
I could just add, if I could just add, and on regarding these things, that these actually are rooted in American history. Let's be clear about it, okay? For a start, make it clear, in 1933, when FDR signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, he actually said that no company should be allowed to operate in the United States that did not pay a living wage. Okay? That's 90 years ago. Okay? 90 years ago. Secondly, the right to a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining was not in his original call for an economic bill of rights because he had already signed in 1935 into law the National Labor Relations Act. But the reason we included this as a separate line in here is because the way in which the National Labor Relations Act has been, and the right of workers to organize has been so devastated by way of the Taft-Hartley Act of 47 and ensuing developments, appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, and also the underfunding of it. The comprehensive quality health care, FDR himself in 1935, when he signed into law the Social Security Act, knew that he had made compromises. One of the compromises was that it left out agricultural and household workers, which it later, eventually under later presidents, would not be the case. They would be covered. However, he wanted national health care as early as 1935, but he could not secure it because the American Medical Association was prepared to launch a massive campaign against the whole Social Security Act, and big business did not want, as I've said before, national health care. The number 7, the meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement, that goes all the way back to Thomas Paine in the time of the American and French Revolutions, when he authored a pamphlet called Agrarian Justice, and actually said that the rich, the landed rich, should be taxed to provide funds in order to provide stakes, stakes, for young people to start out in life and not fall into poverty. And at the same time, there should be the creation of what we now call the Social Security system. So these are rooted. And by the way, the last one, which I just love, recreation and participation in civic and democratic life, in the original proposal that a commission recommended to FDR, who requested the creation of an economic bill of rights, it actually said a right to adventure. We left out the adventure. We assume people can create their own adventures when they can finally get time off.
Amen.
Yeah, I think, and that's so, we actually had a conversation with a couple of local bosses who, have this like hustle and grind podcast now. And, they were, it was really just amazing how they have, and they don't have like this huge, they're small business owners, right? And they're still doing some amount of labor, but they have totally bought into this idea that, like you were saying, Alan, the organizing principle of this economy is neoliberal capitalism, that I'm going to make my way above other people. And, one of the things that one of them said was, it is a poor man's mentality to want to work for somebody else, but it's also a poor man's mentality to work for yourself because you want other people working for you. And it's like, I don't really want that. I don't really want that. And they just thought it was so crazy that I was like, yeah, I think, people should have a right to a living wage. People should have a right to some time off. And they also thought it was crazy that I agreed that seniority in union contracts was a good thing. They were talking about how, isn't it so bad that just because somebody's worked there for 10 years, they might get priority on when they take vacation over somebody else. And I'm like, 10 years is a long time. And for most people, if you've been somewhere 10 years, that's your best 10 years. Like if I work for somewhere from 25 to 35, I should get something for giving them literally the best years of my life, right? And this is a lot of what y'all are talking about, and how, working
it goes
people
all the way back
things.
It goes all the way back to the American Revolution, okay? They may not have had it as fully developed when they wrote the Declaration, the founders, but they put right in the Declaration, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ask anyone today, what would it take to be assured of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Right. And they will probably, on reflection, recite, without rehearsal, this economic bill of rights.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, Harvey. You're telling me that you couldn't pursue happiness if you didn't have a house or a job or health care? I think it would probably. I think some people would probably argue that they would be wrong, but they would argue
you could pursue happiness, but tragically, it might end up you'd be pursuing it in a bottle.
Also, I think one of the things that look, you raise a very important point. And the ideology that you bring up, the left has to contend with. If you actually look at, again, public opinion polls, until very recently, the only group of people that surpassed small business owners as being approved of and liked by the American public were teachers. I fear, given the right-wing offensive on teachers, that may have even shifted further. Now, small business owners, in fact, there's been some very good, as it were, sort of like anthropology of the Republican Party, like who makes up the sort of brain trust of the Republican Party. You know, there is all this discussion of how they're coastal elites and now they're all Democrats, and you know who are the leaders of the Republican Party. And a good article was put out following up on some studies by people that it is largely the country club set of small business owners that exists across the country in metropolitan areas after metropolitan areas, from Boise, Idaho, to Salt Lake City, to Cincinnati, to St. Louis, to Birmingham, Alabama, et cetera, that make up, in many respects, the clear core support, and they're small business owners and such. And then on top of that comes the Koch brothers and all the gajillionaires. But that particular ideology really needs to be shaken up and challenged by the left. And in particularly along the lines of exactly what you were talking about, because businesses can proceed in the way they're doing by having this egregious labor exploitation, view labor as absolutely dispensable parts, make the jobs unpleasant, they don't make them unpleasant, but the wage levels, the lack of benefits makes the people's lives very much a struggle who are working for them. Or you can have a unionized model. What do you have when you have a unionized model? You have workers committed to the project of the welfare of achieving the best place they can where they work and the best product, and have commitment and pride in their jobs. And also, maybe it's worker owned, and then maybe it's collectively owned. And small business, that particular ideology does have to be confronted by the left, because it is at the core of what has generated a society with so many free-floating social pathologies as American life has. I mean, very much at the core, all the way down to the health outcomes and dietary habits of the United States population, which are worse than the rest of anywhere else in the OECD world countries. And if you look at actually social indices right now in the United States, other than basically aggregate wealth, ones that are influenced by aggregate wealth, there are only a few where the United States is just at the very bottom. I mean, you can just name them off the top of our heads, from families imploding, divorce rates, mass incarceration, homelessness, poverty, health outcomes, wealth inequality, on down the line. The United States is at the very bottom of all of the OECD countries. I mean, opioid addiction, et cetera, across the board.
Life expectancy.
Right. And at the very core of it is the abuse of labor, the balance of the population by the logic of American business.
That's so important, and that leads me into I think some of the final questions that we had, and Adam wrote this up, but I wanted to add a bit of context to it, and Alan, the idea that the small business owner mythology that I can pull myself up is so at the core of so much in this society, and I was making the rounds. I'm working on a piece for the Real News about the paper mill lockout in Alabama, and I'm going to be releasing this in some form. And I'm not sure if it'll just be as part of that piece or if I'll do a standalone piece about it. But I had a conversation with a state representative in that area where they said, quote, "I'm definitely on the side of management because I'm a small business owner and I know what it's like to sign a paycheck or whatever." And these people are and management is asking for what would amount to a 10% pay cut. And, this is somebody that it's just, and so given, that entrenched level of ideology from the people that Alabamians elect, the ones that vote, I think that there's a lot to be said about how many people don't vote, and something on the order of only 20%, 26% of eligible Alabamians actually end up voting for Republicans. But, given the things that we're up against here and also across the country, We also know that there is like a small but militant minority of folks in Alabama who support the things that y'all are talking about here, who support the locked out paper mill workers down in Cottonton, who support the striking coal miners and everything that they're asking for. And not only do they support the things that they're asking for there, but they reckon that they should have more and that everybody should have more, right? That they support these things on broad-based issues. And so, given the historical experiences of movements in the past that have been pushing for stuff like this, what suggestions would you have for organizers and activists and unions and outside of unions looking to assemble, what Martin Luther King called a coalition of the conscience?
Well,
wow.
If I could I have a quick line and then I'll hand it over to Alan since he heads Progressive Democrats. Look, I've been saying for a few years now, there can be no vibrant left without a dynamic and vibrant labor movement. But let's be clear about it. Merely fighting one battle at a time will only get us so far, and it doesn't even guarantee us any kind of victories. Indeed, as you were saying, we need a coalition. And the way you build a coalition is usually around a story and a vision. What the Economic Bill of Rights does is it grabs hold of American history, the aspirations of generations, and it projects it onto the present and future, which I know sounds very fanciful, but let me be clearer about it. The labor movement has always pursued the kinds of things that are here. The time now is to grab hold of this Economic Bill of Rights as a way of bringing together the coalition that can actually start creating a dynamic labor movement and not battle upon battle alone, and also a dynamic and vibrant left. As Alan has regularly told me, and in shows we've done together, it is the case that there is a winning political party in this country of progressives, which unfortunately has had to defer to a losing political party of centrist and corporate Democrats. The Trumpsters have taken advantage of that kind of problem, basically. So the thing is that progressives must advance inside of the Democratic Party, but we cannot advance. And I'm a labor unionist and a democratic socialist and a progressive. I see the coalition must come together around this kind of story and vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I want to just say, and forgive me for not having encountered your show previously. Before I was at Progressive Democrats of America, I worked in independent journalism and was a manager of a large radio station in Southern California, a progressive station. This is a brilliant show. I can even just tell from talking with you all. And I think, of course, disseminating this kind of discourse as far and wide as you can among the population will be very helpful. So you're certainly doing one important element of the work. One of the problems we've had, not just in the Democratic Party, but also in the progressive movement, is to not recognize and introduce our ideas and our proposals to the entire country. And so, we are working on coming off of the 2022 election cycle. We want to try to get out the word about progressive politics more in places like Alabama. We're working on a progressive Southern strategy with some people that we'd like to introduce. So there's that. I can't say that I'm an expert in Alabama state politics, but I do believe that the working people of Alabama and the working people of the Southeast will find in the 21st century Economic Bill of Rights a set of proposals that will be very attractive to the sizable majority of the population. Definitely want to pursue that, introduce the 21st century Economic Bill of Rights everywhere we can. What's your sense of the barrier? I mean, I'd have to ask and listen, but I mean, obviously the institutional power of the Republican Party in the Southeast is starting to fragment. But at the very time as it gets weaker in Georgia, it gets stronger in Florida. So that's a different dynamic. Florida is rather unique. And Alabama, I suppose, is a state which has gerrymandered congressional districts. It has the Republican Party deeply entrenched in state power. at the state level and at the statewide electoral level. And so it would be a matter of introducing these ideas and then listening and understanding where the ball is on the playing field, so to speak, and to move forward from there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there about, our opinion about what some of the obstacles are, and
that's another conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole
nother. To have with you guys.
yeah. I think we'd definitely be interested in having that. And actually, we have a listener, a Teamster from California, who said as soon as you came on, Alan used to be the program manager to our great Pacifica station, KPFK. He should get you guys on there. That would be great. And we are definitely open to syndication.
That's a former job of mine, so it makes it a little difficult in that regard. But I would love to propagate your show, be in touch with you and help do this. I think this is exemplary media, actually, what you're doing. But I do think an important element to the answer of your question, though, and I don't know how specific it was to the region of your question. You'd have to rewind the tape and find out from 8 minutes ago. But I do think one of the key things for progressives is to not waver on the commitment. Again, this is what something like the 21st century economic Bill of Rights does. It codifies, it clarifies what the ends have to be. But then we learn how much it resonates in wherever we're introducing it, whatever the audience may be. But it also is a requirement for progressives to understand and take in from the people in each region. One thing I have learned in this job is that the regions in the United States is a vast country. And, oftentimes people who are leading national political organizations assume there's some kind of like unified national culture that makes everything very similar. And I found that to be very much not the case. And the political battle lines are drawn differently everywhere. And so we have to listen and we have to coordinate and follow local leadership as well. But I think everywhere in the country, there are tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in any state with sizable population who are already with us. And so then we introduce what we have, and then we listen back to what people can provide to us and proceed from there.
Alan Minsky is the executive director of the Progressive Democrats of America. Harvey J. Kaye is professor emeritus of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Alan, Harvey, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, indeed.
Thanks, guys. We really enjoyed it.
Yep. All right, folks, we're going to go to our last break, and we will be right back to wrap this puppy up.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Ironworkers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need ironworkers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at AFGE.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We just wrapped up a conversation with Harvey J. Kaye and Alan Minsky about a 21st century economic Bill of Rights. One thing that I really love about Harvey is his utilization of American history and popular revolutionary figures from American history to fight for things that would be good for Americans, as opposed to using their legacy to try to hurt Americans, try to hurt working people here in this country,
or reinforce, some backwards nationalistic type of jingoism. It's refreshing, and it's underappreciated sometimes, the radical and revolutionary traditions within America.
Absolutely.
Harvey is one of the best out there at bringing that back into the conversation.
Absolutely. So last week, a week ago today, Warrior Matt Cole had a Christmas party for non-union employees at the North River Yacht Club.
Way to rub it in.
Yeah. Warrior Matt had a Christmas party for non-union employees at the North River Yacht Club in Brookwood last week, and now a criminal investigation is underway after police say somebody placed several homemade Jack Rocks in the parking lot, and apparently 6 vehicles received tire damage. So, very unfortunate, I'm sure, for those scabs and executives who now have flat tires, or who did have flat tires before they wrote a big check to get them fixed. So, just thought I would share that with you. I think that, it's so amazing that the party took place at a yacht club, because it really kind of, it really illustrates the which side are you on aspect. It's like you've got union coal miners who, there's been no connection of them to this to these Jack Rocks, but you've got union coal miners who are working people, and then you've got scabs and executives partying in a yacht club. I think that for some of the people that would try to make this like don't you feel so bad for the scabs, right? I think that the scenery makes it a bit difficult for them to make us feel bad for the scabs and the executives.
I think this is a story where the less I say on the air, the better. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, make sure that you stay tuned in overtime. Oh, also, appreciate everybody hanging out in the chat. Jacob Jones says, if you haven't liked the stream, it's probably good for the algorithm. And yeah, I assume it is too. I tell people, but I don't know. Presumably it is. But yeah, if you're hanging out watching we've got 27 people watching and only 21 likes. What's up with that? So like and subscribe. And also, if you know people that prefer watching on Twitch, we are now live on Twitch at TVLR FM. TVLR FM. If you search the Valley Labor Report, it doesn't come up. You got to search TVLR FM. So we got to fix that. Make sure it comes up if you search the Valley Labor Report.
Be patient with us, y'all. We're still learning this stuff. But yeah, if you happen to be a Twitch expert, feel free to check out our channel and give us feedback. Let us know what we need to do to up our game on Twitch.
Absolutely. And we've got coming up in overtime. We do have a whole second half of the program for folks that are listening to us on the radio right now. We have a whole hour and a half, usually an hour to an hour and a half that we do online only. And so if you're listening to us on the radio, find us on YouTube, find us on Facebook, now find us on Twitch, and you can continue listening to the show. Today, we have some really cool stuff lined up, but most importantly, we're going to be talking to Matt Weaver. He is a railroad worker, a member of the Brotherhood of Maintenance and Way Employees, which is a Teamsters affiliate, and a member of Railroad Workers United, which is the interunion, cross-craft solidarity caucus that's been pushing for more action from the railroad unions. And we're going to be talking to him about some of the fallout from the last week or so with the rail issue.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. It's been hard to avoid railroad coverage lately, but
probably not super hard to avoid if you listen to conservative radio
That's true.
stations.
Yeah. I should strike that. It's definitely easy to avoid hearing from actual workers, because that's not something mainstream media likes to do a lot. While we have just a minute here before we get off the air on the FM radio, I did want to give a shout out to our friends at Hometown Action. Today is a big day for them. They're having a hometown routes celebrating 5 years of rural organizing celebration down in Camp Hill, Alabama, starting about now from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. So any of our folks down in that neck of the woods, y'all stop on by and say hello to our friends at Hometown Action. Really appreciate all they do. Appreciate their support of the show and all they do in communities across Alabama to try to build working class power.
Absolutely. Also, don't forget about the UMWA folks who are still on strike. You can donate at paypal.me/UMWA Strike Pantry. And leave us a voicemail, 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Go to our website, tvlr.fm. And with that, we're going to head on off of the radio. Find us online, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. All power to the workers. All righty, folks. All right. We're off the radio now. We're going to hit a couple of stories really quickly before we get to Matt Weaver. He's going to be coming on at 11:20 or so. But we're going to take a really quick break right here before we go into overtime. If you do want to call in, again, one more time, that phone number is 844-899-TVLR. Be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
We back?
Yeah, we're back. We're back.
All right.
Sorry about that, folks.
Got rid of those folks on the radio. Howdy, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We've got a great overtime lined up for you. We are going to be bringing on Matt Weaver here in a little bit. But first, Adam's got some stuff. Adam's got some stuff prepped. Adam, let's.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I mean, you've kind of been holding it down today, so let's give you a break, and I'll jump in here for a few minutes. I did have a couple segments I wanted to share today in overtime. Let me swap our camera real quick. So the first thing I wanted to share with y'all today is actually an excerpt from something I happen to be reading. It's not even something I'm reading consistently. I just, as I sometimes do with my attention deficits, I was randomly pulling books out of my bookshelf, ones that looked interesting, and just reading random segments of those books. And there's one that really seems relevant for our show. Why you should be a trade unionist. Right? Seems like it was written for us. It was actually written by Lynn McCluskey, a British labor organizer who wrote this book to demonstrate the ongoing importance of joining and strengthening unions and remind folks how unions are a means for working class people to win justice. So it's in the British context, but certainly applicable here as well. And I'm going to read a very brief excerpt. Trade unions underpin democracy in a world where it is increasingly under threat. In spite of the decades of attacks aimed at undermining our influence and ability to stand up for working people, we stand defiantly uncrushed. We are different groups of workers with different histories, different militancies, or none. Trade unions have to represent all those groups in different and new ways. But always the central theme of solidarity, which we can never put a price on, shines through. Workers want to be treated fairly. That's as common as drawing breath. We fight for fairness. Being trade unionists gives us the ability to look the boss in the eye, to look powerful people in the eye, and to stand firm against injustices. It gives us opportunities to be educated, to become future leaders, and to meet so many good people along the way. Unions are as necessary today as they were during and after the Industrial Revolution. And being an active trade unionist shows us how we can affect the lives of those around us. As trade unionists, we must restore hope. To quote from Percy Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy, we must rise like lions, rise to the challenges, and never lose faith in our collective power. Tony Benn told of how his father said to him, "Dare to be a Daniel, dare to let it be known." Now I say to my children, there is always more to be done. And above all, have the courage to always be on the side of the angels. Trade unionists care for people. They defend people. It's why being a trade unionist matters. Wanted to just drop that into the discussion today. I think it's always helpful to kind of refocus on your purpose and reflect on your purpose and remember why it is we do the things that we do. Why we are trade unionists, why that matters to us. And I really liked what McCluskey had to say there. Ultimately, it's about caring about people. Humanitarianism, ultimately.
McCluskey touched on something that McAlevey also mentions in her books, which is, when he says that we're different groups of workers with different histories, different militancies, or none. Trade unions have to represent all those groups in different ways and in new ways, and that's something that really makes trade unions unique in civic organizations. McAlevey calls union organizing structure-based organizing, I think, as opposed to mobilizing, because when you think about other civic organizations, you think about organizations like Alan Minsky's the Progressive Democrats of America. That's totally and radically different. Not that it's bad, not that it's not good work or whatever, but totally radically different from a union, because the Progressive Democrats of America, the only people that are ever going to that are going to enter into, membership with that organization or support for that organization are people that are already on board with the program, are people that already consider themselves progressive Democrats. Harvey J. Kaye mentioned that he's a democratic socialist. The only people that are ever going to join DSA is people that consider themselves at least democratic socialists. You have, and so it's a self-selecting group, where unions, we are selected by the boss. We're selected by the employer. We don't get to select who we organize with. We organize with whoever happens to be around us. And so there's going to be old people, there's going to be young people, there will be actual literal conservatives, people that are voting for Trump, much less a centrist Democrat that we have to organize with, right? We have to, we're having to organize all across the thing. And so being able to unify, which is the job of a union, which is the only way that a union can function and be powerful and be worth anything, is that it's able to unify people across these divides of gender and race and politics and all of these things. And that's what makes that unification so uniquely powerful. When you're able to, when you come up and you've got this petition that's signed by, 30 different progressive organizations, it's like, well, that's one thing. But you get something that's signed by everybody in one workplace, no matter what their political beliefs are. And that's what a union is. That's really powerful. Obviously, it's powerful for the boss, and we understand why that is, because of the leverage, and the labor power that the workers create, and that's the only way that the employer, the business, is able to function. But also civically, if you get it means something different, I think, and I think it should to politicians. It means something different when a union wants something, when a union has their membership backing something, than it does if you get some other, a progressive party or a progressive organization or something else. It just means something different. And I think, like for like, it means something more if you've got, a similar amount of people in a union versus a similar amount of people in a political organization. It means something more when you get a union actually involved.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there is a distinction there between unions and other organizations, such as political parties. Labor unions, even with some of their traditions, even some of their baggage and weaknesses, they are working class institutions. They belong to workers on a fundamental level, right? I mean, they're funded through member dues. Through some governance structure, there is a democratic governance among workers running the organization, and there's no such relationship with the Democratic Party at state, national level. There's no such operation with most of the other civic organizations that we're talking about and political conversations. It's not the same kind of membership structure. It's not the same kind of governance structure. It's different aims. It's different accountability levels. And so, I was thinking about it earlier in the context of like working within, right? Reformers working within a union and reformers working within a party. And while there are similarities, and I think some tactics and maybe even strategies that can be shared, that fundamental difference there is something we have to account for.
Right.
That unions are unique in that way, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have our own institutions, and to the extent that our existing labor unions do not really belong to the members, it's certainly one of our biggest challenges that we have to address.
And I think that's why, talking about reformers within political parties versus within unions, I think that's why we're much more skeptical of reform efforts within like the Democratic Party. I think, and we're not unhappy or we just had Alan Minsky on Progressive Democrats of America. We're fine. That's fine if that's what people want to do. But I think that the Adam and I are not opposed to it, but we're more skeptical. Whereas we're not at all skeptical of union reformers because like you said and like I said, it's unions fundamentally different and than political parties and fundamentally more worth saving and more intrinsically valuable, I think.
Well, and I would say they kind of have to come before the other. A renewed union movement will have working class power reflected in other institutions.
Right.
But I would add an asterisk to your statement about lack of skepticism of reformers. That is until they get elected, in which case I'm going to be just as skeptical of them as the establishment that you challenged, because quite often they're going to run into some similar issues that the establishment ran into. And, this year's reformers can become next decade's establishment.
Yeah. I meant reform as a strategy as opposed
to
to
individuals. Sure. I just wanted to make sure I clarified that it's not like, we're naive that suddenly, you start a rank and file caucus in a union and all of a sudden, everything's going to work out your way or that, in it of itself is going to like justify your victory or grant you victory. But yeah, I think those are some important things to consider when it comes to trade unions and labor unions and how they relate to other organizations, but some of the really unique aspects to them that we need to account for in our strategy.
Fascinating comment here in the chat from Free American 2020. I grew up in the 60s. My dad was a local union president in Alabama. As a young child, I'd hear the racist comments that people would make, and I remember my dad fighting for all the union members. As a little kid, I remember asking him, why did the union fight for everyone? He said, we stand together or we all fall. I'll never forget that. And that is, it sounds like your dad was a really, really good union leader.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly the kind of stuff that that we want,
And that's one of the reasons why unions are perceived as such a threat to the political establishment and to the wealthy, powerful elites in this country and elsewhere. It's not just a direct economic aspect in terms of, well, they'll have more bargaining power in the workplace, they can extract higher salaries and benefits, etc. Right. Obviously, that is a major part of it. But it is also the power of solidarity to break down other divisions and bigotry and oppression. That power of solidarity, it's scary to the powers that be, right? They're fearful of that, and they always have been fearful of that throughout the history of our country. So I think that's also something that the comment reflects for me is like that power.
Right.
The power of a concept and an organization so strong that in a time when white supremacy was so blatantly in your face, that it could stand strong and defiant against such, bigotry.
Well, and that's how bosses and politicians campaigned against unions back, you're talking about in the 60s and before when unions really kind of came into their own in this country and really became a force. In the 50s and 60s, 1 in 3 Americans were union members. When the CIO launched its Operation Dixie, that's when you started seeing this proliferation of right-to-work laws. And one of the things that the original pushers of right-to-work were saying that was important to have right-to-work is so that their white women didn't have to be in unions, didn't have to be mandated to be in unions with black people. That was specifically one of the things that the people who created right-to-work were fighting for. And that's how, in individual campaigns as well, people were fighting back against unions by saying, "Oh, if you be part of a union, you're going to be part of an organization that also has black people. Even if the black people aren't even in your union at your work, that union represents black people somewhere else. And oh man, that's so bad, right?"
And let's not pretend that doesn't still happen and that these conversations aren't still happening. I mean, it was just a few years ago that UAW was organizing in Canton, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson, and the KKK put out flyers urging people to vote no in the campaign.
Well, and William
this is
Pena,
within 5 years ago, and
and William Pena in the chat mentions that Ron Herrera, a few years ago, Ron Herrera was a few weeks ago,
right,
the president of the Labor Council in Los Angeles, talking about like monkeys and stuff. I mean, it's crazy.
But like I was saying, in terms of the discouragement from unionization, race is still definitely in the background. Sometimes it's in the foreground.
Yeah.
But it's always at least in the background here in the South in conversations that people are having, particularly behind closed doors, because there has been this long concerted effort to tell white folks that unions are not for them, while also telling black folks that they're not for them either. Right? So, that has been a struggle here in the South and will continue to be a struggle here in the South. But I think when you struggle together and you fight for each other's common interests, just like our listener's father fighting for everyone so that you don't fall apart.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and I think that the experience of doing that is one of the most powerful ways to reduce the influence of bigotry in our society. When folks are shoulder to shoulder for a common struggle and a common issue, it breaks down barriers. And, you know, was about 2 years ago, I guess, on the show, you actually had a professor from the University of Washington who went over his research proving how unionization decreases racism among its membership. Obviously, it didn't work for that creep Ron Herrera,
right?
But
right.
you know, him aside,
yeah,
you know, it's obviously, you know, we have to fight racism with solidarity, and I think unions are one of the best pathways to do that.
Speaking of solidarity, have we got Matt Weaver on the line?
Let's double check. I don't think so. No, we don't yet.
Not yet. All right.
I did have a quick update on school vouchers. I can go ahead and talk about here for a minute while we wait for our next guest. So, did want to update folks on some bad news out of Tennessee last month. A Tennessee judicial panel has upheld the state's school voucher law, which allows public tax dollars to be given to families to pay for private schooling. And you can imagine among the Republican establishment in Tennessee, there was a lot of cheering and celebrating about this law being upheld. It's kind of been tangled in the courts the last few years. Folks, we got to stop the school choice scam. School choice can sound nice in theory. I get that. But in practice, the schools choose the students, not the other way around. Students using vouchers end up with worse education more often than better. The public schools and the students left in them are destabilized and defunded. Existing inequities are actually made worse. But, you know, affluent families do get their private choices for private and religious schools subsidized by the taxpayer, and wealthy donors to these private and religious schools get nice tax write-offs, while the private and religious schools, without the accountability of public schools, can now tap into all this new funding and expanded enrollment as they so choose, which is very important, as they so choose. Some families do benefit from vouchers as advertised. I'm not naive to that. I'm sure we can find folks in any state that has tried vouchers. You can find some families where it worked out well for them. That doesn't change the fact that most people end up worse off as a result. Most people do, most families do, most students do, and our entire society certainly does. And I know this is frustrating to some people, but the education of children does not easily map on to free market fundamentalism. So-called competition and profit motives, when applied to our kids, do not produce better results, but it does turn them into commodities. As for me, I would prefer we ensure every child has a free, appropriate public education of the highest possible quality, not weaken the public school system by sacrificing the many for the few. Really looking forward to a conversation we have scheduled later in the month with Dr. Josh Cowan. He is a researcher who used to support vouchers, and he studied them for over 20 years across multiple states. And he there was a blog post recently from Diane Ravitch entitled "Vouchers Are a Disaster for Students Who Leave Public Schools." And among other things, Dr. Cowan recently said about his research, quote, "There's another data point you need to know up front. Vouchers overwhelmingly fund children who were already in private school without them. In states that have released those numbers, Arizona, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin, we know more than 75% of voucher applicants came from private schools." So I really recommend you check out Dr. Cowan's work. He had an op-ed published on the Hetchinger Report this summer that was really, really good. You can find it in that Diane Ravitch blog piece highlighting his research. And as I mentioned, we're excited to have him scheduled to come on the show later this month. So if you have any questions about private school vouchers, send them our way.
That's really fascinating, you know, and you don't see that a whole lot. It's somebody who like used to support something and then they actually studied it and they're like, oh, you know what? No, this is actually really, really bad.
Right. And Diane Ravitch is the same way. I mean, she was Undersecretary of Education under George W. Bush. She was a big fan of No Child Left Behind. She was one of its architects. And then she kind of saw the monster they had created.
Wow.
So we do have, believe we have our brother from the railroads on the line here. I think Matt was trying to get in the Zoom. He may already be in their Zoom.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can. Yeah. So appreciate you coming on. Now we've got Matt Weaver. He is a member of the Brotherhood of Maintenance and Way Employees, which is a Teamster affiliate, a member of Railroad Workers United, which is an inter-union cross-craft solidarity caucus of railroad workers. Matt, thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your guys' attention. Rail labor really needs our voice to get out there. It's Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. We build and maintain America's track, bridges, and buildings throughout the country, all 48 states. We're not in Hawaii and Alaska that I know of.
So, you know, I think that, you know, and we'll get into some of the issues that y'all are facing, but the fact that you're here this morning is actually indicative of some of the problems that y'all have on the rails, because we had previously scheduled Paul Lindsay, who had been on the show, and not to say anything bad about you, Matt. I'm sure that this is going to go great. We talked a little bit this morning, had a great conversation, but we had previously scheduled Paul Lindsay, and I call him at about 9 o'clock this morning, and he said 15 minutes ago I got called in. I have to be at work in an hour and a half, and you know that's crazy to me that you're the idea that your entire life, or most of your life, you're 24/7, you're always potentially an hour and a half away from being called into work.
That is most definitely the case for my brothers and sisters in transportation. The engineers and conductors are on call. Their extra boards are smaller. Their time off is less predictable. You know, I've been spoiled as maintenance away. I've worked 410s for a majority of my career, so I've been able to raise my family and coach my kids' soccer, basketball, t-ball, baseball teams. I've been pretty spoiled in this scenario, and that's the attendance policy, which is really very frustrating for all crafts. 12 unions in the railroads, but transportation, it's really punitive on their way of life. Their quality of life is very tremendously affected by these call lists and attendance policies.
Absolutely. So, you know, Matt, let's just recap what has happened for us in the last week with Biden signing this rail deal. You know, what led up to that, and what does that mean for y'all that are going to be working under this contract now?
Well, we got the Presidential Emergency Board recommendation, and then that was just a recommendation, but it was better for maintenance away than any other craft, because we got our craft specific ask. We wanted him better away from home expenses, per diem, that kind of stuff, and we're the only craft that got that. But we, maintenance of way, voted it down with the signal department and the it was the firemen and oilers and the smart TD, which is the conductors, smart transportation. So then we were back at the bargaining table, and Biden called on Congress to impose not the PEB, but those tentative agreements that our four crafts voted down. So the House went about it, presented, they voted to impose, which is not really democracy. If we voted no, how does the House and the Senate impose an agreement? But the House passed the 7-6 sick days, 7 paid sick days, and in this time of pandemic and quarantine, I have a letter in my lunchbox to give to the police if I get pulled over in quarantine conditions that I'm allowed to go to work, because moving freight in America is essential. So I was essential employee, and then we went from essential to expendable at the bargaining table.
Right.
And sick day, it's ridiculous. We don't have any paid sick days. It's absurd.
That is ridiculous. And you mentioned that it's anti-democracy to force y'all to work under a contract that you voted against. And here we're having the Democratic Party, all democracies on the ballot. Democracy's on the ballot. We're the party of democracy. We're the party. They're hammering us with this messages, which is not not unreasonable, because obviously the Republican Party has really given up the idea of majoritarian rule, and we understand that, and that's the messaging is not bad in and of itself. But how do you message that and then directly go against the will of these rail workers?
Well, if you look at the vote count, in general, the Democrats lean far more in favor of us getting those sick days than the Republicans. A couple of Republicans jumped on board, but it seemed like that was grandstanding, or maybe even pandering for votes.
Right.
But so I mean,
we saw John Cornyn. We saw John Cornyn come in and say that he was going to do it, and then I guess he got a call from one of y'all's bosses and decided not to. I don't know.
It's a wonderful thing. I mean, there is some influence there, but that is because I don't know the exact number, but do we move, if it comes to move up to 70% of all freight, parts of all freight that moves in the country ships by rail, that's a big footprint. And, solidarity, cross-craft solidarity is our key. And we really don't have that a whole lot in my career. A little better now. And I believe Railroad Workers United, railroadworkersunited.org, helped me breathe new life into cross-craft solidarity. I was at the National Labor College, the George Meany Center in D.C. for hazmat derailment training, train the trainer and teach police departments and fire departments to move people away from, how to read MSDS sheets and that kind of stuff. That's where I really got my first bite of cross-craft solidarity. But Railroad Workers United has really stepped up, and it's important that we work together, because real labor is there's a great divide in much of rail labor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and so, you mentioned that the split between the Republicans and Democrats, and I do think, and I think it's important to understand that, and to understand that, it's not like there aren't differences, but how do you think it is that unions ought to relate to Democrats in light of this, but also, I mean, frankly, in light of the last 40 years of, Democrats' relationship with labor? It's not like this is the first time that we've been screwed over by Democrats, and yet we still continue, hundreds of millions of dollars from working people, from our PACs, in which I do want to ensure that I stress every time I talk about union political contributions, I do want to make sure that people understand that it's not coming from dues, it's coming from PAC dollars, which union members voluntarily contribute to on top of their dues, and so it's union members understand that that's what the money is going to, generally speaking, but still, it is still
amen, brother.
Yeah, and that's something that I do try to be very careful of, because there are a lot of folks that say, union dues money, you have to pay for politics if you join a union, and that's not true. And we want to do a little bit of a little bit of myth busting, but it is still our money, even though we voluntarily contribute to our PACs and stuff. Is it worth looking at changing strategy? And I mentioned this to you this morning. Warnock won in Georgia. I'm glad he won in Georgia. Very happy he won in Georgia. I would have voted for him if I was in Georgia. But also, it felt a little bit weird seeing the Machinists Union, for example, who's involved in this rail dispute, talking about how many doors their members are knocking for working class champion, Raphael Warnock and how much of their PAC money presumably went to, sending out mailers and advertisements and stuff like that. And it felt weird because he's not been on the forefront of this issue. He didn't even make the time to go vote. He was at home campaigning. He didn't vote.
He didn't vote. He
Yeah.
didn't vote. And I was all for him. I made calls for him too.
Mhm.
And he didn't vote. And you're like so frustrated with that kind of public servant, quote unquote, that who did he serve by not making a vote? Who does Manchin serve in the midst of coal country when he's declared a Democrat, but he votes against labor a lot of the time? It's very frustrating. I mean, I believe that Citizens United and the McCutcheon Supreme Court decisions have corrupted our republic, and we've turned to politicians serving their campaign financiers and letting lobbyists write the laws. What the hell is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an oligarchy in so many ways. I think.
Amen.
We've
My
heard
daughter
people
gives me
warn
hell
about
when I
it.
say that.
Yeah, people warn it about it, but we're living in it. We are already experiencing it. I mean, in case the metaphors and the connections to the Gilded Age couldn't be clearer enough, we're talking about a railroad labor dispute to close 2022.
Right.
I mean, that seems really appropriate considering the Gilded Age level of inequality and extreme greed and corruption that we're experiencing in this country. Sorry, I didn't mean to get on my soapbox and jump in there.
No. You're preaching to the choir. I mean, I tell guys all the time, because I used to be a bit greedy and work all the overtime I could when I was on a backhoe on the track work. And I had a couple good years of big overtime, but I never let that get in the way of raising my family. And I tell people all the time, we work to live, not live to work. And you've got to keep that in mind. And you should be rewarded for hard work. And it seems like the working class has been shit on for a couple generations. It's like, come on, people, stick together. Solidarity is the key to our success.
And so what do you think about that? About what should unions be looking at changing our strategy with respect to Democrats and how we operate in elections?
I think it should go on a political candidate one by one scenario. I mean, Senator Rob Portman in Ohio, who is retiring, unfortunately, because JD Vance got that seat, but Senator Portman wrote the REEF Act, and that was the act to eliminate the sequester of railroad retirement, sick pay, and unemployment. Now, it got rolled into the pandemic, but anything in the pandemic bills is eliminated once the pandemic is declared over. So Portman was a great ally for rail labor in that, and I found myself working with both Republicans and Democrats in Ohio because I believe they understand serving the working class, serving their constituents. But boy, Ohio is awfully red, and it's very depressing for me.
And so, looking forward, what can Biden do now? Because the fight for sick days,
executive order.
Yeah, the fight for sick days is not over yet, right?
Correct, and he can write an executive order, or Congress can work on a bill to give us sick days. Biden promised sick days for every working American. That was his campaign. Was that pandering for votes? I
almost forgot about that. I'm glad you reminded us.
Yeah. So I think that he's done well, and there's no doubt in my mind that he was the better choice for me to vote for president. But it's time to serve the people. There's far more working class in this country than there are oligarchs.
Right. And so the executive order that you mentioned, it's actually all he would actually have to do is amend an executive order that Obama wrote. Obama wrote an executive order back in 2014, 2015, saying that all federal contractors have to give their employees minimum wage, or they have to give them 7 days of paid sick leave. And he specifically exempted rail carriers from that railroad companies from that, because rail companies are obviously federal contractors, and yet they don't have to abide by that because Obama exempted them from that executive order. And so all Biden would have to do is right that wrong from the Obama administration and say that just like every single other federal contractor, rail companies have to, at minimum, provide 7 paid sick days, and he could do that at a stroke of a pen.
Absolutely, brother. And that's the whole part about pandemic and them saying that we were federal contractors and we had to abide, be available. And, rail labor has been cut by 30% in the last 7 years because of precision scheduled railroading, Hunter Harrison's business model of do more with less. And it's really, rail labor is suffering because of this, and they're suffering as well because of that contract being imposed on us. How can we imagine railroads coming to the table and bargaining in good faith if they know that the politicians are just going to give them what they want every time now?
Yeah, I was going to emphasize that the precedent it sets is so poisonous to negotiation. And the other thing I was going to say is that, yes, a strike may have been averted, aka they are imposing this contract undemocratically, but that doesn't change the conditions there, which I would anticipate a lot of resignations and a lot of retirements. I'm sure anybody who is close to retirement is counting down the days. Folks who don't have a lot of time in the system yet may be trying to get out. I mean, are you sensing there could be a lot of turnover, even more than you've already experienced?
I predict that after the back paychecks are deposited in rail labor's checking accounts, there's going to be a lot of people looking for a new career. I can't say resignations, but I predict they'll be looking for options in Toledo. Right. We've got refineries, there's transportation, there's linemen, there's a lot of jobs in our area, and all around the country jobs are getting better for the working class. And it used to be people were really looking to get hired by the railroad. Not so much anymore.
Right. And something else that I wanted to ask about, the politics is that there has been a lot of folks online, it seems like, that have wanted to take this opportunity to say that, the squad, quote unquote, AOC, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, that they are now they're now class traitors and they're strike breakers and they're just as bad as any other Democrat because of their vote, and they're saying that people who are hesitant to take that stance, people like Jonah Furman at Labor Notes, are carrying water for the establishment, is words that I've heard, which is the first time that I've heard those words ascribed to Jonah Furman. And so,
no doubt.
So how much blame do you think that folks like AOC and Jamal Bowman deserve for and in fairness to the people who are making this argument, they did vote for the tentative agreement that did not include sick days, and then they voted for the second thing that included sick days, but the second thing ended up not passing. And so,
as we all could have easily predicted when they decided to make it two things, right? I mean, that was the whole point.
Yes,
it wasn't unpredictable, and so the And so now, Bhaskar Sankara, who's the editor-in-chief of Jacobin, he said that whatever things of the moment, strategies of the moment or whatever, AOC's name is going to be a yes on this strike-breaking tentative agreement. And so, how much blame do you think that folks like her deserve, and how ought we look at them in light of that vote, you think?
I can't condemn them because I can understand the need for commerce to flow in America. I can be frustrated that they're not doing more to address those specific issues that we have that would make quality of life better for all of the working class, not just rail labor, not just organized workers. If they want to serve their constituents, let's do the right thing and give paid sick days, a less restrictive attendance policy. Let's have the regulators regulate the corporations for the good of society. I know people might be thinking that sounds kind of socialistic, but let's serve the people, damn it. I want my unborn grandkids to have a better life than I do. And I think I got a pretty good life.
I'm with you. It's not a lot to ask that we try to live up to those lofty words in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, that we try to actually be we the people, and the public servants are actually supposed to be servants to the public. It's not that radical, but but because it has not been that way for so long, because of decades after decades of working class people just taking it on the chin, it does seem radical to even suggest it. That what if we actually had public servants? Wow, I mean, that's most of us will never experience that, right? Or at least we haven't yet. Most of us haven't. So I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, and
I find. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I find that if you're the squeaky wheel, you be more demanding. I mean, I've had great fortune with talking to people. I testified in Columbus for the House Transportation Committee about two-man crew. I mean, people who have a just cause should not be muffled by concerns of criticism. Give it to me. I'll take what you have to say and we'll work with it. But be noisy, rattle the cage, because damn it, the working class has got to step up.
And I think that for me, it's definite. My understanding is that there have been that they received some inclination from the BMWE United. Are you aware of that caucus in BMWE?
I probably am, but that really doesn't sound so familiar to me. I don't think that I am a part of that. But I've October 6th, I bumped back to my tools. I bumped a carpenter foreman job. I had been a national division. I'd been the director of internal organizing for about 8 years, and it's traveling the country and building up info. Mm-hmm. So, that was the best job in the world for a minute, but it was only supposed to be 1 or 2 years. So must have been doing something right.
I think that I had heard.
But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that I had heard something that there was some rank and file caucus in the BMWE. I think maybe Ross Gruters was involved in it in recommending that Jamal Bowman and these other folks vote yes, because for some reason they felt like the 7 days was contingent on their first vote being yes, and I'm not. But it's difficult, definitely difficult for me to understand why they would vote yes on that TA without that didn't include the 7 days. I don't know that I'm willing to totally, throw them out. But it really, really seems like, man, that was a bad vote.
I agree, and so I don't believe it was BMW United, because Gruters is not maintenance away, but gotcha. It was part of the working class, and it may have been part of RW or something. But there's so many factions out there that it's hard to keep track of sometimes. But I agree entirely that if you're going to force a tentative agreement on us that has been voted down. And we all knew as well, we had thousands of calls to Congress about the sick days. They knew the routine. They knew that we did not have sick days. And, I have a story of Norfolk Southern, Roanoke, Virginia, one guy coming in sick, not really knowing that he had COVID, but he came in sick because he had no sick days. He had no vacation left, no time off. And everybody on the section team, the local yard crews, was quarantined or sick, and they had to bring in production gangs, big tie gangs and that kind of stuff to do section work, to do regular yard maintenance. That's a fault of management not having ability to go off sick or to fill the holes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So here's a question then, and this is something that's come up. We've been talking about the Democrats and their relative failure, but it's important to it's worth asking the question. On the other hand, is Trump coming to save the rail workers? I've heard some people say that Trump would have never signed this deal. What do you make of arguments like that we should, now that the Democrats have failed us, we should just all be Republicans now?
We ratified an agreement under the Trump administration that was far worse than this, what we're getting now, the CBA we're getting imposed on us now. And I don't see any inkling of Trump saying anything that would have done anything to have us fare better than where Biden is now. Biden is definitely the better option for president for the working class than Trump was. I feel there's I don't know if you want to, how do you want to call it? Why do working class vote for Trump? I think they're frustrated with both parties, and Trump was kind of a breath of fresh air, and he was a little bit rude, and he's not a politician, but that doesn't mean he's better for us.
Right.
It doesn't serve the nature of the working class and their families.
And I think that's worth underscoring that this happened, this whole thing happened under Trump, and there was it didn't get this far because I don't think that workers felt like they had as much leverage as they do now, but there was there was nothing from the Trump administration during that time, and as far as I can tell, there's been nothing from Trump during this, condemning Biden for anything. He hasn't come out on Truth Social and truthed out like, oh yeah, the workers deserve 7 days of sick days, and
right. I mean, he had 4 years to sign that executive order, and
right.
He never did it.
Amen. Absolutely. So I mean, people have a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda, but that's just talk. That's just hearsay.
Right. But like you said, there are some rail workers that are planning to do that. They're planning to vote Republican despite the Democrats because they don't feel like there are any other options. And so, to what extent do you feel like the rail unions, the unions leadership, and organizations like the AFL-CIO, to what extent are we and they to blame for that kind of narrow vision of how to make change? Why do they think that the answer to this issue of Democrats are screwing over us, so we're going to go vote Republican. Republicans are screwing us over, so we're going to vote Democrat. Why is that? Why is the answer always to switch teams as opposed to building the union?
It's so frustrating because of the duopoly in America. What other options do we have? In rail industry especially, so almost everything you do every day has politics involved in it. Maybe now where you go to lunch, but we're not really allowed to go to lunch anymore. So every part of your job is affected by political decisions, rules, and regulations.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I used to work in public school setting, and that was something I told my coworkers there as well. I mean, your salary, your benefits, your working conditions, if it's connected to government or if it's connected to tax dollars, those are political decisions. And you don't have a choice but to be involved in politics because it's involved in you. Whether you're playing along or not, it's impacting you.
Yeah, and you're a fool if you want to just say nothing about it, because that takes away any leverage you have at all. It's like not voting because you're mad. It's like you vote when you're mad. Come on.
Right. Well, so
I do like to shout out to the teachers and nurses. They have been exponentially. It's amazing how much action the teachers and nurses have going on. They're essential. And they realize it. They've been ignored for too long. So I'm very excited about nurses and teachers stepping up and being active.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the key is like you mentioned earlier, the power of solidarity, and the more that we have each other's back, when our brothers on the rail need help, we need to have their back, and they'll back us up when it's teachers in the classroom or nurses in the hospital or what have you. That's really what it's about. And I will say, as disappointing as this whole fiasco has been on so many levels, the way it's shaken out, the one thing I will say that has been positive is the amount of solidarity I have seen from people on behalf of rail workers. I've seen a lot of people who don't know anyone who works on the railroads personally. They're not personally impacted per se, but have been very vocal about the rights of rail workers and about the needs of rail workers. And so I think that is something that's promising. And if there's anything good that came out of all this crap, I hope there were some good relationships and connections that were made, and some of that solidarity can be channeled moving forward.
Yep.
And I take that back to rail labor and say, let's work on this next round of bargaining, having one bargaining coalition with signatory status that no one agrees to a contract unless we all agree on a contract. Then you'll build power with solidarity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned from this whole situation, and I think there's a lot of ideas probably circulating for the next contract. It's already time to be thinking about the next contract, and so I hope that those of you who have been involved in this struggle can push forward some progress on this, both inside your unions and outside in the community as well.
Most definitely. I mean, we've when we did the last bargaining round, we followed the Florida juice train up the whole coast, Miami to Jersey, and we had other entities there with us. Habitat for Humanity, things like that. We talked with each other, and that those kind of interconnectivities and communications and networking are powerful. It's kind of amazing. I mean, let's make people realize it's class conflict in this nation that's tearing us apart. Divide and conquer is strong, and we're falling for it every time.
Yeah, and we definitely saw them try to do a lot of that in the media with rail workers. I mean, I had a couple of people tell me, "Do you know how much they make?" One of my family members said, every article I've read about this makes a point to tell me how much their salary is. They may not mention all kinds of other things in there, but and so we definitely saw that with this struggle, and we're going to keep seeing it every time workers are in struggle. The media and the powers that be are going to try to divide us and pit us against each other, and so it's something we have to be aware of, and it's something we have to constantly do battle with, because it's coming, whether we want it to or not.
Yeah.
And Matt, we need to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
We need to acknowledge that across the board and be prepared for that. That's got to be the first thing we think of, is that what the adversary is going to be up to, so we can prepare for that battle.
Right.
Matt Weaver is a member of the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees, a division of the Teamsters, and a member of the Railroad Workers United. Matt, you have anything else you wanted to make sure, anything else you reckon folks ought to know before we let you go?
I've got a couple details on the cost of those sick days. I was told a couple weeks ago that all of the stock buybacks up to October of this year would have paid for, so less than 2% of those stock buybacks would have paid for those 7 sick days for all of rail labor.
Wow.
For 1 year. Wow. The profit margins, less than 1% of the profit margins for any year that we've seen would pay for those sick days. And then last week I saw that Warren Buffett, the owner alone of BNSF, made enough in 1 day to pay for all of those sick days for 2 full years for all of rail labor. So this is not a big ask,
right?
but when it's all about profit over people and shareholders first, and that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Well,
Matt?
we're behind you, and we appreciate all you're doing, and definitely appreciate you coming on the show and being willing to spend time with us and chat about it.
Yep. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks so much for your time. If there's more info you need, feel free to send me a text, send me a link. I'd like to give a shout out to the AFL-CIO Transportation Trades Division that was able to bring all of rail labor together under one umbrella and one voice. That was very powerful. And I'd like to see them be very involved in our next round of bargaining as well.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you guys. Have a great week.
All right. Yep,
Appreciate
you too.
Take care.
Adam, before we, head off of the rail labor issue, I think that there's a couple of clips that maybe we'll play if I can pull them next week, because they'll be a bit old by next week. But it's never, I don't think it'll be too bad because they're just so crazy. But before we go off of the rail labor issue today, what is your thought? What do you think about what happened with AOC and all them voting yes on in the House? I think that both of us, I think, are probably maybe more skeptical of Democrats than some, but I think that you may even be more skeptical than me. So I wanted to make sure that you had a chance, especially if we put this out as a clip. I wanted to make sure that your view was represented there as well. And I really still don't know how to make it. Don't know what to make of it exactly. But I mean, what is your general response to the votes that were taken there?
I mean, I think it's despicable, but not at all surprising. And what does that mean? I guess is the bigger issue, right? I find it despicable that they would have voted to impose a contract. And particularly when they had to see the writing on the wall. I mean, if some jackass like me in Alabama could figure out exactly what they were doing with the two bills, surely they knew what was happening there in the parliamentary games that were being played. So that's how I feel about it. I found it to be a real despicable thing. In terms of, well, what do we do about it moving forward? I mean, what do you mean? She's not my representative.
Mm-hmm.
AOC is not. Jamal Bowman's not my representative. My representatives never even pretended to give a damn.
Right.
If I lived in their district, I would certainly be letting them know how I felt about it. Especially if I was someone who had campaigned for these people or donated to these people. Do you just write them off wholesale? I mean, no more than you already should have written them off, frankly, because bourgeois politicians are going to do what they do. The electoral political system is what it is, and we're going to lose more than we win in that arena because it's not meant for us. That's not an arena for working class people. It is for capital to adjudicate its conflicts, to maintain the society operational. I mean, maintain our society as operational. And so I guess the last thing I'll just say about it is I think people spend way too much time thinking about that. Is AOC bad now, or was she already a sellout, or, well, if we call her sellout, what does that mean? I mean, I think a lot of it's just bullshit. It's not a lot different than when I'm shooting the bull about how the quarterback played on Sunday and how the coach should have ran the ball a few more times. And I didn't really care for that defensive coordinator. He called the prevent defense a little bit too much. I think it gets into that kind of commentary where, okay, we're just bullshitting here. We're just talking, just like we're talking sports or entertainment. It's not really connected to anything. Now, if you're a member of DSA, I think you have some real things to grapple with if you're up in New York and those chapters that are endorsing these people as part of their organization. That is an issue that they have to address. And again, I'm not, I'm not there. How would I operate if I were in that meeting in New York or whatever? I don't know. I feel like I would need to hear some answers, certainly for me to consider that person to still be on board with the organization. But that is the danger in linking yourself to elected politicians. No matter how great they may seem on certain levels or at certain days. I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. I gave probably too much money to Bernie Sanders throughout his 2 runs for president, but I don't agree with everything Bernie Sanders does or says. And in fact, there are certain areas where we have some pretty strong disagreements. And you can still appreciate, I still appreciate what the man has done for politics. I'm glad he is there as one of the few voices who half-ass tries to fight for working people. So, I can appreciate, just like Jamal Bowman has a bill called the Green New Deal for schools, for public schools. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Doesn't mean I care for Jamal Bowman's positions on everything else, though. So I think you take what you can take. You never build cults of personality or fandoms around politicians. Theoretically, they're supposed to be public servants, but we know that's not what they are. They're agents inside of a state that is meant to uphold capitalism. Sometimes we as working people can exert power and influence inside that arena. Sometimes it's reflected in, more progressive candidates and politicians that get elected to that arena. But I think there's just too much noise sometimes about it.
There were a couple things that you wanted to pull out, and I wanted to underscore, and I think that would be more or less the official position of the show, which which I think would be that there's a lot of talk about it, probably too much talk about it, and in the same way that really left political people would say normies will just switch from Republican to Democrat based on, who screwed them over last. People in the online left, whatever that means. It seems like a lot of times they can kind of do similar things. They'll say, okay, well, now I'm totally writing this person off, or now I'm totally all in for this person because of the last thing that they did. And that maybe is not the best way to approach politics. But the important thing is, and like you said, we're not in her district, and we're not, I think, we're not super active in DSA, and I'm not a member of DSA, and we're not in New York DSA. And so, those are conversations that are going to happen there. But the important thing to underscore is to remember that to build independent working class power, build your union, because what they say, their reasoning for this is that, one, the leadership of these unions told them to vote yes, yes. And they also say, which after that conversation with Matt, I'm wondering what the veracity of it is. They also say that there is a rank and file caucus in the BMWE that was advocating yes, yes. And that's what that's their defense, is they're like, well, look, the workers told me to do this. And so the way
people are going to make mistakes in parliamentary arenas,
but
we should be willing to accept that. I'm not saying it necessarily in this case, but I mean, it's not unheard of that a vote does not necessarily reflect someone's true values on something if there was a misunderstanding, such as what they're alleging here.
But the way to fix that is to have a really strong and representative and militant working class, caucus in these unions, militant working class unions that are driven by the rank and file, that will be standing up loudly and saying, for example, there should have, it seems to me that there should have been obviously, there should have been some union out there saying obviously you don't vote yes if it doesn't include sick leave. But that just wasn't the case. And, for all of the things on Twitter or whatever, it just was not the case that we had a representative voice from the people affected telling these people not to vote for it, right? And so the way to fix that, so that they don't, so it, you know, if we're of the mind that this was just a fig leaf and that really they're listening to bosses or whatever, I mean, maybe that was the case, maybe it's not. But the way to not give them that fig leaf and actually really put some pressure on them is not to say, not to put all of your eggs in the election basket, to say that, I'm gonna, this primary challenger to AOC, which I'm not to say that she shouldn't have a primary challenger, but just to say that building your union is going to be the thing, right? Building your union is going to be the thing. Building independent working class organizations that can hold people accountable, and the conversations around this or that personality is kind of second order.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the goal that I have, and I think most of the folks listening would agree with, is that we build a working class movement that is powerful enough to exert influence in elections. Yes. Mm-hmm. Exert influence in the legislative sense, yes, but also do more than that, above and beyond.
Right.
I think that would be ultimately what we're trying to get to, a movement on the level of working class movements of the 60s and of the 30s and of the populists around the turn of the century, who were able to extract concessions from capital and from the state in numerous different ways.
Yeah.
It looked different depending on the era, depending on the issue, but all that's to say, be mindful of how much, I think, time and energy you really spend on it, and what does it relate to the material world. And, I mean, if I decide I'm going to cancel AOC, okay, who gives a damn? She certainly won't. nor will the bosses and politicians who are running things. So they're not the root of all evil. They're also not our saviors. They're politicians, and sometimes they're going to do bad stuff because the system we live in is completely broken for normal working class people. And so you can't expect a broken system to produce perfect results. I mean, and so
and I would say that I place, I have no problem saying Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden sold these rail workers.
Oh, absolutely.
And
whether you want to go that far with certain individual legislators, I think it gets
but these
murkier,
leaders,
and I'm not sure how much it matters.
Yeah, but these leaders, and then even Pramila Jayapal, who
total sellout.
Like the idea that she led her caucus to do this, as opposed to leading her caucus to oppose any TA that didn't include the 7 days, that just totally does not make sense to me.
But it does match up with some of her behavior so far as chair of the Progressive Caucus. I don't follow that stuff super deeply because I think it's a lot of palace intrigue. But it's not. This isn't the first time that she has. I don't know if betray is the right word because I don't know. But betrayed progressives.
And I also wanted to tack on an addendum to the bit where we were talking about, what online lefties might call the normies switching from Republican to Democrat and vice versa, because of the last person that betrayed them. And to what extent unions are to blame for that narrow vision. Because according to the reporting that I'm getting from like folks like Jonah Furman, in his newsletter, he said that, quote, they chose an inside strategy that relied on entirely on Joe Biden doing the right thing. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing this date so that it would get out of the Trump presidency. And then as soon as Joe Biden, there was no mobilization up to the strike dates. There were no rallies. There were no informational picketing. There was no nothing. It was just like the leadership of these unions really just expected Joe Biden to give them a good contract.
And they are absolutely culpable in this.
Yeah.
They absolutely are.
Yeah. And like, that should not have been the strategy from the union. The strategy from the unions should have been mobilizing and galvanizing their rank and file and saying, Joe Biden is the better enemy, but he's still our enemy. And we have to, mobilize in that fashion. And as opposed to taking these, crazy photo ops with a terrible TA that surely they knew that their members were going to vote down. And then, in fact, their members did vote down. But Joe Biden got that photo up. Marty Walsh got that photo up. And it's bizarre. And so then it becomes incumbent on, rank and file workers to build, to build their unions into things that can fight and can oppose Republicans and Democrats.
Right. Yeah. Because you're hitting on something there. There are going to be people, and there already are people who are doing that. Well, the Democrats screwed me, so I'm going to vote Republican. Just like there are people, I feel certain, in the rail industry right now who are thinking, my union kind of dropped the ball. I should probably drop my membership.
Right.
What's the point?
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy for folks to be disgruntled and disillusioned and get into that trap. I think that's something we're going to have to mind for. And I do agree that the unions have some culpability there in terms of the education and organization of their membership.
Mm-hmm.
If that's folks' first response, that's not good.
Right.
But,
and I mean,
they
in
may
the
be
same
questioning,
way that
they may be, the thing is, though, if the union leaders are going to be tiptoeing on how they approach because they don't want the membership questioning them.
Mm.
And so at this point, union leaders, in this case specifically, but also in general in the United States, so much of union leadership is disconnected from membership and is so associated with the Democratic Party establishment in D.C. that they're almost inseparable. And so to critique one brings critique to the other. And I think there's, the thing that stood out to me that you told me about was reported by Jonah Furman,
Mm-hmm.
was that Liz Shuler's call with folks across the country, with labor leaders across the country, where Liz Shuler was carrying water for this, trying to defend this, a deal that doesn't have sick leave in the year 2022, a deal that was on track to be imposed against the democratic will of their own members. That's pretty shameful.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of blame to go around. The people who are uniquely fixating on the squad or whatever, I think that's either misplaced or just for engagement and popularity, and because it's the thing that might get them some clicks or something. Right. Honestly, I think that's a lot of the narrative is driven by that, and people get sucked into it. But remain critical of all politicians because they do not work for us. They're supposed to. We have to try to make them work for us, and occasionally we can get results, but only through collective action and collective movement.
Yeah. Adam, do you want to hit on this the stuff that you've prepared about
political engagement?
Actually,
I don't think I want to do that. Just because we've covered some of this ground today, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak. So I think maybe next week I'll get into it. But yeah, I do have some stuff prepared about political engagement in Alabama, the lack thereof, what folks are saying about this, because I even asked some folks, asked around in my network, why do you think we have such low political engagement in Alabama? What could change that? So I've written about that and what are some of my thoughts about how to proceed, which have been shaped in part by some of the conversations we had today with Harvey, J.K., and Alan Minsky. So yeah, we'll save that for another time. But I know a lot of people are having these discussions right now about what do we do, how do we relate to Democrats. I'm thinking of it in a more Alabama sense, but we're all thinking these questions, and I know it's something that we're gonna just keep plugging away at. There is no magic answer, I don't think. My fallback is always an all of the above answer, that everybody should be doing whatever it is that they think they can do and should be doing. If that means they need to go operate inside the Democratic Party and they can do some good for working class people there, then knock yourself out. I'm skeptical of that, and think there are probably better ways to do it. But it takes all kinds and all places and all spaces trying to make things better. So, I would encourage folks to find what it is that you can do and how you can contribute in whatever way that is, small as it may seem. You contributing to something is probably going to make you feel better than bitching and moaning about people on Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, then with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, right, Adam?
Yeah,
all right.
That's fine. Excited. We got some cool stuff coming later this month. Got some good guests lined up.
We are going to be doing our first best of. We're not going to be live on the 24th, and we're not going to pre-tape. This is the first time that we've ever done a not totally new. Like every week, isn't that bonkers? We've been on the air for a year and a half, and every single week we've released new content.
Yeah.
We're
taking Christmas off, y'all.
Yeah, so we are. So give us ideas for best ofs. Give us ideas for best ofs. You can text it to us 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. You can send it to our Facebook, Twitter DMs, all that good stuff. But yeah, send us. What is your favorite interview that we've done? Favorite segment? Favorite YouTube clip? Send your ideas to us.
Absolutely. And really appreciate it, y'all. Thanks for everyone who tuned in today, everyone who liked and shared and subscribed. And, we'll have most of this clipped up and released on YouTube in the days ahead. And feel free to share that on social media. Send it to folks. Let us know what you thought.
All right, folks. And with that, we'll see you next week.